A little bit of work on the hive today. This shouldn't take very long. I'm going to attempt to do this smokeless. I don't think it's going to be so invasive that they will require smoke, but we'll see. I could be wrong. What is this? I'm about to tell you. Let's see here. Kind of looks like maybe a flux capacitor.
That's the power of love.
Or could be the new album from Pink Floyd. I could see that. This is in fact what is called a bee escape board and escape board. So the way this works, the top box here, which is where the honey should have happened, could have happened, but didn't this year, it's time to take that off. And they don't need it on there during the winter. Into the season's over, I'll be removing that box. But there's bees inside of it. Not a lot of them. Activity has dwindled in that top box, but there's a few ways to go about this. I don't want to disturb the bees, or disturb them as little as possible. And how do I take that box off if it's got bees in it and not just shake them all over the ground or blow them into the air? I wanted to give them a gentle option to leave that box, to vacate that box and move to the lower boxes. This is the purpose of the bee escape board. The way it works is it will be installed right in this layer here. And what happens is, this is the upside. Naturally, the bees have to go up and down throughout the hive to do their jobs. The bees that are in the top will find their way down through the hole. They will find their way out of this little labyrinth naturally. But what they aren't very capable of doing, and this is true with pretty much any insects, it's very similar to the way a yellow jacket trap works. You get a sharp cone, and they don't really find their way into that cone. They are more likely to find their way out of it than into it. The bees that are trying to find their way back into that top box later, well, they'll be drawn by their sense of smell. They'll be all over the screen because that's close to the opening there. They can smell honey or whatever there is up in there that's attracting them, but they can't really reason to find their way in. Should they find their way into one of these openings, well, there's a 1 in 3 chance of them finding their way to the second layer. And it's actually less than that because they have a tendency to follow along edges. Similar to other insects, cockroaches run along corners and edges. Bees will do something similar to that. And so the chances of bees finding their way back in is very slim. Finding their way out is guaranteed. At that rate, the box will empty out. In a few days, I will come out and I'll remove that top box and probably won't find any bees at all inside there, maybe a couple, but it's not very likely that there'll be any of them in there at all. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and get geared up and pull that top box off. I'm going to remove the queen excluder, which is currently in that same position, and that's the screen that keeps the queen from ever going into that top box. Guarantees there's only honey up there and never any brood, no eggs. And take that piece out, install this board, put the box back on, and wrap it up, and that's it. And then in a few days, should be able to take that top box off and get it stored for the winter. And then we'll take the next steps of getting this hive ready for the winter. So. Some pretty girls over the screen here. Some of them are very upset about me opening up their hive. That's okay. It'll be better for it in the long run. There we go. Knock them all off of there. One more. There you go. Okay. Set that aside. bring in the bee escape board. So this installs with the triangle side down. That couldn't be any simpler. Just like that. Not too big of an upset. So it's been 5 days since I installed the escape board there, and theoretically in 2 days, 3 days, there shouldn't be any bees left in that top box. But you know, never assume anything. I'm not going to use any smoke again today because this is pretty non-invasive. I am going to be suited up, obviously, because you don't want to take any chances. And anytime you open up the hive, you are particularly, well, what's happening is the bees, they don't know who I am. You know, even though I'm their caretaker, they don't know that. I may as well be a bear, you know, breaking into their hive. So they can get very defensive very quickly, and it's always wise to have your protective gear on when you're going into a beehive. But I'm going to take that top honey box off, the honey super, and I doubt there's any honey inside there at all. If there is, it might not be enough for me to even bother with, but we'll see. But I was, you know, optimistic that maybe I'd see honey this year, but because it's the first, you know, it's my inaugural season, started out with a very small colony of bees. They have done amazing things in that hive, building up the colony, but for me to expect honey, which for, you know, it has to be surplus honey because I let them make up enough honey stores for themselves to get them through the winter. I'm only taking the surplus honey, so whatever is beyond what they need to survive the winter is what I'm taking. And to expect them to have done that, made enough for themselves and then surplus for me in their first season, just, you know, it's expecting too much. But they were close. They were off to a good start, and I might still find a little bit of honey in that box once I get it pulled apart. But we'll see what happens. And well, stay tuned. It's amazing how much of that propolis they put in there to glue this thing down. That's all made out of tree sap and resins, and they make glue out of it, seal up all the cracks, any places that they think are leaky, and that's what they do. A little bit of weatherproofing there, and keeping out the little critters that might be coming in there trying to steal from them. They do a very good job of sealing things up. Leave that board there for a little while, give those girls a chance to crawl back inside the hive, and everything's closed up a little more permanently for winter here in a little bit. Okay, I talked to you about a couple of things here. One, this is the escape board that was used to drive those bees into the lower boxes and out of the upper box. In that labyrinth, that's how they find their way out, but they can't find their way back in. Something interesting though is this was only in there for 5 days, and in that amount of time the bees have completely propolized every seam in this box, around the outsides of the lid, all the way around. All that orange stuff, that's them weather sealing every possible thing. Furthermore, they created beeswax, started building like comb and connectors on all this. 5 days time, they did a lot of little bit of handyman work, handy woman work in this hive. So I thought that was interesting. I thought I'd show you that. So that is the honey super that I removed with the plastic frames. There is beeswax inside there, where they coated all the cells in there, getting them ready for honey that never actually happened this season. And one of the things about storing frames of wax, honeycomb over winter, and so that it's nice and fresh for next spring, is you need to prevent pests from getting into it. The pests that we're worried about, in particular, are wax moths. There's a few other things as well that could have potentially laid eggs in there. Hive beetles are another one, but there's methods of storing these things that people do. And a lot of it is that you assume the worst. You assume that wax moths have already laid eggs in the honeycomb, and what you don't want to do is just bag it up or box it up and stick it in the shed or the garage and have those larvae hatch. They will tunnel all through and make a disgusting slimy mess, and it's disgusting. They kind of wreck things. We don't want that. So people will take the frames and they'll stick them in a freezer for 24 hours, and that kills the eggs of anything that might be in there. And then you don't have to worry about it. You can store them someplace secure and dry and hope that more moths don't find it in the meantime and lay more eggs. I am choosing to go a slightly more scientific route. This is it's not Rubbermaid. What's the other brand? Sterilite, whatever. And you know, it's not exactly airtight, but the bottom portion is. It's like a bucket. And by storing my box and those frames in this bucket, if I could fill that bucket with something that would prevent anything from living in there, and something that's not going to be lethal to bees down the road, that'd be a wonderful way to store it, right? Set it in the tub, fill the tub with something to keep predators, pests from living in there. What could I put in there that will prevent anything from living and still not be problematic when I'm ready to use it again next spring? The answer is dry ice. Picked up a couple pounds of dry ice, a big old brick of it. You see the bag is getting all frosty here. What is dry ice? Dry ice is solidified CO2. It's pressurized down to a liquid and then further pressurized down to a solid ice. As it melts and evaporates, it becomes just a gas. It becomes a gas that's heavier than air. If I lay this brick in there on top of that hive and snap the lid on it, as the dry ice melts, it will just fill the entire tub with an invisible gas of CO2 that's heavier than air. And all the oxygen will work its way up to the top and out around the seams of the lid. And because the lid will be snapped on, it's not exactly an airtight lid, but there'll be no air turbulence in there to blow away the gas. I will have essentially a bucket of CO2, invisible CO2. If anything finds its way in there, or if anything's already in there, it's not going to survive. As simple as that. Now we're going to have a bucket of CO2. That stuff will melt over the next many hours and displace all the oxygen in that tub. And it will sit nice and stable and upright on a shelf in the shed until next spring. When I pop the lid off of it and lift the box out of there, it will immediately air out and be ready for use. No fumes, nothing weird. And more importantly, no critters.